President Joe Biden got out of bed the day after the 2024 election convinced that he had been wronged. The elites, the Democratic officials, the media, Nancy Pelosi, Barack Obama, they shouldn't have pushed him out of the race. If he had stayed in, he would have beaten Donald Trump. That's what the polls suggested he would say again and again. His pollsters told us that no such polls existed. There was no credible data, they said, to support the notion that he would have won. All unspun information suggested it would have been a loss, likely a spectacular one, far worse than that suffered by his replacement as Democratic nominee, Vice President Kamala Harris. The disconnect between Biden's optimism and the unhappy reality of poll results was a constant throughout his administration. Many insiders sensed that his inner circle shielded him from bad news. It's also true that for Biden to absorb those poll results, he would have had to face the biggest issue driving them. The public had concluded, long before most Democratic officials, media, and other elites had, that he was far too old to do the job. In truth, before that consequential June 27, 2024 presidential debate, many insiders, people with a much better window into Biden's condition than the wider public had, saw things that shocked them. Most of them said nothing. President Biden awoke the morning after the election sure that he was not to blame. 2.5 miles away, north on Connecticut Avenue Northwest and west on Massachusetts, Harris walked solemnly into the dining room of the vice president's residence at the U.S. Naval Observatory. She was joined that morning by her husband, Doug Emhoff, her sister Maya, and her brother-in-law, Tony West. They were incredulous. It was real. It wasn't a nightmare. It had really happened. They knew that they'd been running from behind, that their challenge had been considerable. They'd had only 107 days to convince America that the vice president, to a historically unpopular president, would be a change agent. They had hoped that the margin of error in the polls they saw would break their way. The enthusiasm they felt on the trail was tangible. They were hopeful. But overnight, the TV networks had called the race for Trump. Sitting at the breakfast table, Harris knew she would have to call the president-elect and concede. And then she would have to finish the speech she never wanted to give. Victory has 100 fathers and defeat is an orphan. So goes an old saying President John F. Kennedy invoked after the Bay of Pigs fiasco. Few Democrats were running around claiming paternity of the political wipeout that was the 2024 campaign. No one thought that the Harris campaign had been without error, but for the most knowledgeable Democratic officials and donors, and for top members of the Harris campaign, there was no question about the father of this election calamity. It was Joe Biden. Harris, loyal to Biden to a fault, might never say such a thing. But plenty of people around her would. "We got so screwed by Biden as a party," David Plouffe, who helped run the Harris campaign, told us. Plouffe had served as Senator Barack Obama's presidential campaign manager in 2008 and as a senior advisor to President Obama before largely retiring from politics in 2013. After Biden dropped out of the race on July 21, 2024, Plouffe was drafted to help Harris in what he saw as a rescue mission. Harris, he said, was a great soldier, but the compressed 107-day race was a fucking nightmare. And it's all Biden, Plouffe said. Referring to Biden's decision to run for re-election, then wait more than 3 weeks to bow out, Plouffe added, "He totally fucked us." This isn't the typical finger-pointing of a losing campaign. Before the 2020 primaries, in December 2019, 4 Biden advisors, in what Politico reporter Ryan Lizza read as a strategic leak to get the idea out into the open, told Lizza that it would be virtually inconceivable that he will run for re-election in 2024, when he would be the first octogenarian president. "Look, I view myself as a bridge, not as anything else," Biden reiterated in March 2020, as he was on the verge of capturing the Democratic nomination. Instead, supported by his senior advisors and his wife and family, the oldest president in American history announced in April 2023 that he would run again. This meant potentially being president until he was 86.